Earl Durand was a strange guy, and the townsfolk of Wyoming considered him an eccentric, an oddball, a little bit weird in the head, and in the last 11 days of his life, they thought of him as a cold-blooded killer. Well, as the story goes, he'd been arrested a little bit before for, hunting out in the hills without a proper license, and he'd always escaped from jail. At least that's the legend. He escaped from the Cody jail.
One day with meat so raw, Earl was captured by the law, hauled away to Cody jail, bedded down on a cot of straw. Then he fled into the hills, leaving behind the city's hills. When the lawmen came to get him, Earl those greedy hunters drills. Earl Durand, born too late, a mountain man. He was shot down in the Tetons by the law's bloodthirsty band.
And one of these days, the townsfolk really don't like this man walking around with a beard who's going and bringing and putting food on the table for his parents. He's a known poacher. He goes out and sometimes he kills cows, he kills elk, he kills deer. And they send a party of police to arrest him a little bit west of town, headed towards Cody. And they try to flag the car down, but it's not stopping, so one of them hops in front of it in the road, and his car swerves off to the side. Earl Durand, very noticeable, 6'2" mountain man with a long beard, grabs his rifle and heads off into the hills.
Earl Durand, over here is where I usually send people to start. Because we have mapped out the days and the events. So basically, to summarize what happened was Earl was caught for poaching cattle, thrown in jail in Cody, which is our Park County jail. He broke out of jail, he hit the deputy over the head with a milk bottle, came back to Powell at his house outside of town. I don't know exactly the location. And the sheriff and undersheriff went to get him. Typical 39, let's go get Earl and get him back to jail.
And he basically pours out the side of the car, and the two teenagers who are in there with him, 16 and 15, they get arrested. They get sent to jail, sentenced to 6 months. Well, he hikes 20 miles along the North Fork, and they arrest him the following day because they find a dead cow. And a local cop deputizes two rancher boys, and they go and arrest him. Well, Earl Durand doesn't think anything of it. He goes to jail, and he thinks, I'll just be out again pretty soon. It's the Great Depression, and everybody understands. And also, I really don't believe in having a hunting license, and it's not too far out of season, apparently. So they start talking to him, the district attorney, about possibly sending him to jail for 2 to 20 years because the cow belonged to a rich rancher. And, well, Earl Durand believes it, and a lot of people start making fun of him because, again, he's weird in the head, he doesn't have much education, and all he's ever really done up until this point is run basically from here down to Mexico and back wearing buckskin clothing.
They hauled him in for hunting elk out of season, found him guilty, sentenced him to 6 months in jail. Well, from where he was at, in his jail cell window, he could see the Wind River Mountains, the mountains that he loved. But then one day the DA come in and started talking to him about some rich rancher's cattle that had been shot, about pinning the whole thing on him. So Earl says to the DA, he says, well, if I'm found guilty of that, what's it going to mean? So the DA says to him, well, you'll have to spend 2 years in the state penitentiary at Rawlins. Now, 2 years is an awful long time, and from Rawlins' jail cell window, he wouldn't be able to see those mountains that he loved. So one day when the guard come in with his breakfast, he conked him over the head with a milk bottle. When he come to, he told him to drive him out to his folks' place.
So when he's being served breakfast, he takes a milk bottle and bashes the deputy over the head and says, you're taking me to town. And he goes to his parents' house and they're saying, Earl, please just go back to jail.
When they tore down the Park County jail, Ted Blair, Quinn Blair, they own the Holiday Inn in Cody, purchased the jail cells for their Holiday Inn tourist attraction down there. I don't know if it's still there. And when they were redoing it, they brought in and donated the jail cell. That would have been the right time frame for Earl Durand. So Earl Durand's possible jail cell.
And I guess he opened the door, they let him out, and he just took a milk bottle?
When they were serving him lunch, as you can see, there's no slot through. So I'm sure that they opened it up to either retrieve his dinner or serve him dinner, and he, with a milk bottle, hit the only person on guard. I don't see the name slipping me right now. The deputy, they hit him on the head and knocked him out, and stole his gun and made it back to Powell. So So they went out there to retrieve him and take him back to Cody, and he shot them, which then he started running. And he stole guns and all of that stuff along the way. Lots of out up the Clarks Fork Canyon, back into town.
He sent him back to town with a message then that he didn't want to kill nobody, he just wanted to live free as he wanted to live. But that if they come after him, he'd shoot to kill. So the sheriff and his deputy, they come out after him, and he shot them both, and he took off into the hills. In the wilderness he lay, changing lair from day to day. Come to town to get some shells, see his folks, then get away. Earl Durand, born too late, a mountain man. He was shot down in the Tetons by the law's bloodthirsty band.
The American Legion post in the town of Powell, Wyoming was partly founded by Marshal Lewis, who went unarmed with the deputy sheriff to arrest Earl Durand. Well, it's said that Marshal Lewis was actually friends with Earl, and for some reason, Earl shot the two of them and went over for the hills and the oaks outside of town, but killing a marshal that was a World War I veteran with two daughters, age 16 and age 14, it really turned all of Wyoming against Earl Durand. So he realized what he did, and I believe that he grew progressively more suicidal over the next 10 days, hiding out in the hills. And it was what mobilized the entire town against Earl Durand. And Earl says, if you send somebody to get me, you better shoot to kill, because I'm going to kill you.
When Park County got too hot, Earl decided to change his spot. Rambled down through Yellowstone to the Tetons at a trot. Then the sheriff swore so hard he called out the National Guard. And with howitzers and mortars they played down their last hole card. Earl Durand, born too late, a mountain man. He was shot down in the Tetons by the law's bloodthirsty band.
He knew enough of the community to know who had guns and ammunition and all of that stuff. So here is a map of the area and the daily events that happened, which of course then alluded to a posse chase, and then he killed a posseman. It's quite the story. And then just newspaper articles that go along with that. I will say when Western Union telegrams between Sheriff Blackburn and the National Guard.
And so after killing his friend and another lawman, Earl Durand decides to head west of town here at Clarks Fork Canyon, where he sets up and he kind of changes his hiding spot every day, and at night he slips out and gets some food. But the sheriff, who has been away in California for the start of the fight, he is incensed, and local lawmen call in posses and the National Guard from Montana, which is only a few miles north of us. And they come out with their howitzers, their machine guns, and their mortars, and they find one of his hiding spots, and around evening one day they send up two local boys from Medici. One of them's actually a famous rodeo guy, and Earl Durand picks him off. They're telling him, surrender, we've got you surrounded, and Earl picks him off. Well, Earl Durand he goes there and he lays down covering fire so nobody can go and get their bodies. And as the crows circle, the local militiamen begin to think, oh man, these guys are going to be picked clean by crows before we have the chance to give them a proper funeral. In reality, Earl Durand was waiting for nightfall so he could go and take their boots, which would leave less of a trace as he's hiking through the hills, and he takes one of their badges. And he says he's hiding up in the hills right up here, and he's hoping that one of these cars is going to come by and he can hijack it. Well, they're all Montana National Guard cars, so they're going in convoys of 2 or 3. And he finally comes across a local family, and he comes out there with a long beard and, you know, a badge on him, and he says, hey, I'm one of the posse, I need a ride back to town. And the local family says, well, all right, we'll give you a ride.
And pretty soon he was out of ammunition, so he cut off his beard and cut off his hair with the knife that he had up there. He come down to the line then, and he says to the man there, say, have they got that Earl Durand fella yet? The guy says, nope. So Earl Durand says, well, I'm about out of ammunition. The other guy says, well, I'm about out too. So Earl says to him, well, how about driving us both to town? We can get some more ammunition. So the guy drove them both to town. Earl, he went into the bank where he had some money.
And on the ride back, he says, by the way, I'm actually Earl Durand. And they say, why didn't you just tell us? And Earl said, I thought you wouldn't pick me up. So they bring him back to town, and he gets some more ammunition. And he's basically just kind of robbing different families of their ammo. And eventually he decides to rob the bank, and that's where he makes his final stand. I truly believe that he was suicidal at this point, because when he was riding back to town, the family said that he was doing just fine, he seemed in good spirits, but then he said, "Come to my funeral, boys."
And then, of course, it ended in the robbery of First National Bank. He came back into town the last day, was going to rob it, and then the whole town lit up. People showed up with their guns, and he was shot and killed. So, and then during that time, it was making national headlines. So you have to remember that this is 39, when Hitler's like invading Poland, but like the terror of the Tetons has eluded the posse again. It's quite the story. Then it became a lot of the comic books of the time when the famous crimes were popular. And then in 1979, they made a movie, The Legends of Earl Durand, starring Martin Sheen and Slim Pickens. It made its world premiere downtown at our theater here.
After hijacking a car at Clark's Fork Canyon, Earl Durand rode into town and walked up to the bank with a couple of guns, a duffel bag, and decided to rob it. If you take a look, the First National Bank of Powell, Wyoming, the door would have actually been here at the time of the robbery, so he would have walked right in through the front doors. Well, he walked in and he basically said, "Hello, everybody," and he wasn't particularly angry or violent with them, at least initially. He tied their hands up and made them into a human shield, and he robbed $2,000 to $3,000. And it seemed like everything went well. There were no gunshots. He walked right in there, so nobody really took notice. And with all this money, this is what leads me to think he was kind of suicidal. He just started shooting into the walls and screaming. And outside, there was a drugstore. It no longer stands. But one of the men who worked there worked for the news. So he called his buddy and they started live broadcasting this. And everybody in Wyoming was now aware that Earl Durand was holding up this bank. In fact, at the time, they all thought that Earl Durand was over at Clark's Fork Canyon, and they thought it might be some other robber. So the townsfolk basically deputized themselves, and as was kind of common back in the day, they showed up with a bunch of guns and were basically laying siege to the building. And this would have been the front of the bank here. It's now a window, but if you take a look at some of the concrete base that it's built on, you can see some bullet damage. So you can tell that people were just shooting at the front of the building, very likely with a bunch of hostages on the inside. And that's kind of what happens when you use just regular civilians that haven't even been deputized by the sheriff or any of the police. And what happened next was, of course, Earl Durand, probably suicidal. Nobody wants to actually go through with it at the moment. So he realizes again, he is up in over his head and tries to escape with his human shield, and he gets shot.
Townfolk heard he was in there and they gathered outside. Earl, he come out with a bank teller in front of him at gunpoint. Some trigger-happy 16-year-old kid shot him from the crowd, and by reflex action, he shot and killed the teller. And then he turned the own gun in his own self, and he shot himself. Someone later asked the kid how he felt about killing that notorious outlaw fella, Earl Durand. Kid said, "Sick."
And then just some more articles to summarize the events and personal experiences. So that's basically his whole story. Up on the stage we have some of his guns that he stole from like the Graham family and some of his other caches. We have a hat that the lady, Vastily Dutton, where the bullet whizzed by her hat. I don't know if she was in the crowd or in the bank when it was being robbed.
Can I ask, he robbed the bank, and it seems like he had the money. Why did he start shooting at the walls, if you could guess?
I think that, he came in to do the robbery. I think that, Wyomingites showed up with their own guns to help get Earl, under control, and I think he just started shooting. I don't think he was shooting at people necessarily. He was shooting at the walls just as maybe trying to make his last getaway. Or, nowadays it's like, I'm going out in a blast of glory. I don't know. I can't tell you how he was thinking. Right up in the Cody Country Legends, which is their summer guide on Earl Durand, about this. But here's some of the, more of the magazines and stuff that it was. But on the other side you have the guns that he stole. And then one hand-carved pistol that somebody brought in that he carved for a younger kid when he was little. And then some of the cash that he stole from the Cooley's family and all of that. So
but Earl was free as air, and down from his mountain lair he'd slip through the lines at night, and at dawn he'd not be there. Till at last, with food all gone and his stomach pinched and drawn, he faced them in the twilight and their bullets cut him down. Earl Durand, born too late, a mountain man, he was shot down in the Tetons by the law's bloodthirsty band.